Hi, everyone. So I am kind of in my own line of research right now, and I'm trying to figure out the best ways to really, um, I guess, promote information to hopefully help people have a better understanding. Um, I've been doing this for some time, especially within the past couple of years, being able to research things about my own self and my own struggles. And one of the things that has been just, of course, roaring through our media right now is the Black Lives Matter movement. And I am for the movement personally. And the thing is, sometimes we can be so, I guess, consumed with what's happening on social media. So I wanted to go to a source that is outside of that. So right now I have a line of sources that I'm just kind of going through. And so today I want to talk a little bit about what it says in this book I just read. And so just to preface this, I was looking up information specific to how white supremacy may have had influences on the education system, specifically in, let's say, like the early 20th century. Mostly because, as you can tell, I am a white woman, and I have, of course, family members who were alive, prior to the civil rights movement in the 60s, and sometimes I'm really baffled by some of the things that they believe, because it seems fairly ignorant. And so I wanted to kind of research this topic a little bit. And so what I did is what you're supposed to do for like any college paper, which is going to databases outside of Wikipedia and Google and, figuring out if there are sources that are related to a certain topic that might actually have some validity. So I did that, and I came upon this book, White Lies, Race, Class, Gender, and Sexuality in White Supremacist Discourse. It is written by Jessie Daniels. This book was published in 1997, so some of the facts may have even progressed since then. Jessie Daniels, and you'll have to forgive me if I'm looking to the side, I have some notes so I can keep track of what I'm actually saying here. Jessie Daniels has her PhD, and she's a professor of sociology at Hunter College at the Graduate Center, CUNY. So she does work in sociology and critical social psychology. So some of the things that I'm going to talk about are things that should be considered in what we see in America today and in our society today. So the first thing is, I want to preface it with a question, because a lot of this might draw also, I watched the documentary by Ava DuVernay, I really hope I'm saying that correctly, 13th, and actually the new Jim Crow is in my line of things that I'm reading as well, so hopefully I can talk about that a little bit too, but this is mostly just to inform people in case you don't want to take the outside research, that it's coming from a person who is trying to do the outside research, and hopefully you'll want to look into these sources yourself, and try to figure out things on your own outside of what I'm saying. But if you don't feel like reading, here are at least some things to kind of summarize what I have researched, okay? So the first question I want to ask is, when you envision a prisoner, what do they look like? And sadly, most of what people will describe is usually a person of color. That's the sad reality of it, is usually we associate prisoners and criminals with people of color. And it's because of what has kind of been pushed to the forefront through, these underlyings of white supremacy. So I will also preface this with saying I am a Christian, okay? And the thing is that one thing I'm kind of coming to terms with is noticing how there is I read another thing in this book as well about how, things start being led more by capitalism than what the church ideals are. So the book, she does mention in the book that several places where the KKK was networking, one of which were Protestant churches. And it's not to say that those ideals may be highlighted in a certain way, but it is important to note that if the KKK is networking in the church, how can that be impacting what the church knows today? And I think that's so crucial because that's where we are getting, things are being targeted like homophobia and racism and inside of the church. And if we think of the most crucial commandment from Jesus, that we are to love God first and foremost and then love others. And it just baffles me that we talk about loving others and yet we experience this ideal in the church. I mean, like, for me today, to think of someone like Donald Trump being the spokesperson of the church, it baffles me. And there's a lot I can go into, and some of this will kind of outline that as well. So I'm gonna keep going and just kind of say the KKK was networking in Protestant churches. Okay. There was also this thing invented called identity theology, or sometimes you can find it as identity Christianity, which was basically suggesting that the chosen people in the Bible were of European heritage, so they were white, they were of Nordic descent. And meanwhile, it claims that black people and Jews shared the same bloodline as Cain, who identity theology likes to claim was a descendant of Satan. And I think we can understand now that Jesus was Jewish and a man of color. But identity theology kind of pushed that idea. And I think that's where we find things like white representations of Jesus. And, they talk about racial mixing as well. Jessie Daniels talks. So what Jessie Daniels does, and she finds these I think she talks about 5 different white supremacist sources and groups, 2 of which I can think of off the top of my head. One was called WAR, W-A-R, can't tell you the acronym. And yes, there is an NAAWP. Okay. And so that's where a lot of these sources come from, which include caricatures. But the thing is when you look at these images, they're not really that far off than what is being promoted by a lot of white Protestant conservative families. It was talking, so she talks about how there were a lot of talk shows of the time where they would have these debates between activists and white supremacists. And what the goal was from these talk shows was to hopefully let the public see just how terrible and inhumane the white supremacists were. However, those white supremacists were using this as a recruitment tool, and it worked. And I think that's another thing that Jessie Daniels was saying, is that she didn't want to promote way too much of what, they were claiming, because she did not want to, I can't remember the exact term she used, but there's a term for where you try to expose something to really show the inhumanity of it, but by doing that, you're actually recruiting to that cause. And in the case of white supremacy, we don't want to recruit too much. So this book was published in 1997. So around the time that this was written, there were 40,000 registered white supremacists. Now, granted, registered, as in public knowledge, as in this is out there. And of course, the more that, society tries to fight against racism, the more that these people may go into hiding. Some not. But they do it in discreet ways. And again, we need to acknowledge what these ideologies were creating and what we have today. So white supremacists paint a picture that dehumanizes black men. I think that's obvious. Okay. So this one is really important to me, and it's funny because I wrote this, and I wrote down the comparison before she even mentioned the Central Park jogger. But I myself am a survivor who is, a part of the Me Too movement. And what is so frustrating, and what this outlines, I think 13th also talks about this, is that many sexual assault cases go unheard unless they have a way to create the picture of the black man being the perpetrator, in which case now people will listen, which is very unsettling. And I even put in a note that I thought of they're now the Exonerated Five, formerly the Central Park Five, and I think we say the Exonerated Five because we don't want to keep putting that title on them, of the 5 teenagers who were coerced into, giving these recorded, witness statements so that they could be wrongfully put into jail. And then we think of things like Jeffrey Epstein, okay, who was a rich white man. And I think in 13th, they even suggest that you are more than likely to get out of jail if you are poor. You are more than likely to stay in jail and be incarcerated if you are poor and innocent than you are if you're rich and guilty. And of course, we can talk about redlining and talk about how the system specifically attacks minorities so that they are the ones who are more than likely going to be incarcerated. I think that's what the new Jim Crow goes into. That's what 13th is all about. And another thing is that white supremacists not only want to target people of color, but they also want to target, they want to emphasize their own homophobia. And the way that they can continue targeting people of color is that now that we have kind of shaped the system to specifically target people of color, first of all, now when we think of prisoners, more than likely, especially like from a time prior to now, hopefully we're getting better. The idea is to place that image on a person of color. And then we talk about sexual assault in prisons and how black people are also being targeted, specifically black men are being targeted as, being forceful sexually to white men. And now painting this picture of, now not only are black men going to sexually assault white women, but they will also sexually assault white men. And so it's this continued picture being formed of a criminal versus another human being. So there's this white male necessity to be the breadwinner, and as a survivor of domestic abuse, I can attend to that a lot. I relate to that a lot because I think that I also had, my ex-husband is white, and he had the title Christian stamped on his forehead, meaning that he can say things like the N-word and saying it describes a personality more than it does a race, which he was doing it to be condescending and towards a person of color. And the fact that I was the one who was getting income and he wasn't, that was infuriating to him. So there's this image of the nuclear family. Now tell me if you've heard this one or not, where you have a white man with a gun in the front of his family, okay? And then slightly in the background, you have his white wife. And then slightly in the background, you have the son and the daughter. And even though it looks as if the son is younger, he is still in front of the daughter, okay? So you have this white man protecting his family, who's obviously in the forefront, who is symbolizing the family, right? And then to one side, you see God Bless America. And I'll tell you the rest of the picture in a moment, but again, that is the image that people have of the perfect family, especially in, conservative Christianity, toxic Christianity. And let me again say, I am a Christian, so me attacking the church is not, I am attacking the church. And if I'm going to be, banished from the church for that, fine. But I need to talk about the toxicity and the history related to what's being taught today. So, white man in front of his family, God bless America. Guess what the other side says? There was a book written by a white supremacist called Thunderbolt. And so the symbol of the thunderbolt is actually white power. So you have what everyone deems as this perfect Christian family or conservative family attached to white power. And you can't pretend like that connection's not there. And I think a lot of people want to say, oh, well, not that part, but all this, sure. No, that's the whole point, is that this whole image is being created as a symbol of white supremacy. Anyways. So there is the conflict of the Confederate flag, of course. We know that the Confederate flag is usually represented as a symbol of racism. You can argue all you want that it's about Southern rights, but if we're talking about Southern rights and talking about, oh, well, they just wanted states' rights, usually that flag is not being used as a symbol to represent, oh, well, I want my states' rights. Usually when you see it, it's in hate crimes and hate acts. And so there is this constant conflict between white and black masculinity, especially in white supremacy. And there's a picture of a black man, for lack of a better term, the way that Jessie Daniels words it, sodomizing a man with the Confederate flag, which gives off that impression that as long as it's not done with your body, that, there's first of all that notion that like, oh, that's actually you being a warrior. That makes you more masculine. Whereas if it's actually being done with the body, then that enforces that whole new idea of homophobia. And for some reason, they want to make that distinction. There's this warrior and victim mentality with white men. So the warrior, the one who fights, who provides, who protects the white woman. And then there's the victim of like, oh no, like affirmative action and people of color are stealing my job and they're going to make me feel inferior. And meanwhile, white women are being seen as breeders. Breeders because of this fight to continue the white race and make sure that it lives on. So you see them either in their sexuality, or you see them as that mother figure of being a breeder to continue the white blood line. And that made them avidly against, abortion, because they're like, oh, white women are having abortions and black women are breeding their own kind and everything's becoming unequal, and it's a whole thing. So, Jessie Daniels discusses Susan Smith. And I made sure to look up Susan Smith after reading this to make sure this was an accurate story, which it is. And she was a white woman who claimed that a black man had kidnapped her children only for it to be recognized that she was the one who killed her children by letting her car roll into a lake. And how quickly people were, again, able to address this man being a criminal versus the white mother. How could she possibly do this? That can't be possible. And the thing is that's such a common thing now. Because we see, we all know the video of the woman in the park who called specifically the police knowing what's going on. And white women are expected to be sexually available to white men or they were deemed racial traitors. So white men were not usually deemed racial traitors. They always pined it off on white women or on, it has to be white heterosexual men because, of course, then we have, and this was written in 97, so it talks a lot about, the connection to homophobia and AIDS, and so if you're a white heterosexual man, you were not deemed a racial traitor. But if you were a white woman who was either, a lesbian or bisexual or, a woman who was attracted to other women or to what they call the racial other, then you were a racial traitor. And then it suggests that black people, and it later says Jews as well, were claimed to be, who again, that same racial other, not white, have more illnesses specific to the blood. And the reason why I am laughing is because it's a nervous laughter, first of all. Secondly, because I won't say who, but I have a family member who does make claims that the blood of black people is tainted. And of course, there were other illnesses, like they say they're more prone to heart and lung diseases and everything, but they specifically want to target blood and try to say that their blood is somehow tainted or poisoned, and that, of course, if you know anything about things related to the KKK, is talking about the superior white line. And they were also trying to suggest that they have lower IQ levels because, again, white supremacy likes to target and compare black people to, I'm using their words, so I'm sorry, gorillas, and try to say that they're more savage and beast-like. And then it claims that the brain of black people evidently has the capacity to double so criminal behavior capacity doubles. That's what it was trying to say as well. And that, of course, it's that first question I asked, that black men are painted as the common perpetrator to crime. And then the way that it attacks black women is trying to push the idea that they are aggressive and welfare mothers. And of course and it also targets young girls, specifically girls of color, by sexualizing them. And saying that girls wore this in order to gain the sexual attention of young boys. And it was used as a tool to justify the rape of women who were slaves. And this makes me think a lot of when I worked in schools and how now there's this dilemma of being slut-shamed, and dress code is now being used as an excuse to continue slut-shaming young girls and saying that it is a girl's responsibility to not distract boys and men. And I can go on my whole spiel about that, but there's also self-control, okay? And then even if And so, of course, white supremacy does target Jewish men as well, saying that it challenges their white masculinity. And um, when it discusses Jewish women, it was not termed as such, but this was the comparison I made, essentially kind of claiming that Jewish women were gold diggers. And the reason why I use that term is because it was pretty much saying that they would use their sexuality to, obtain something material from Jewish men, but, would withhold from them sexually otherwise. And it was also, so evidently, in the white supremacist world, feminism was shaped by Jewish women, and Jewish women were often correlated with lesbianism. And so, of course, there were not racial slurs, but hate slurs, homophobic slurs that were used as well to kind of say that it was, and of course, white men could not be racial traitors, but white women could be. And if white women were a part of the feminist movement, it must have been because the non-whites were pushing them towards it. And so everything is about being a traitor, being an other, and I will not say what feminism was called because I'm not going to use those words in here. Just know that they are homophobic slurs that are connected to the feminist movement. And then this image continues to be painted. Okay. So it was, of course, targeting specifically white daughters because, again, they don't paint white men as being traitors. That was pretty much saying that, if they had romantic partners that were not white men, anything other than that, then it was suggested that the child be excommunicated from the family and that they essentially hold a funeral for the child because they are racially dead. And I'm sorry, but if we really look at what society is looking like right now, how if, some kids, some high schoolers, some people are scared of admitting who they are that might not be as visually represented. So, for example, being a part of the LGBTQIA community, who this idea is still embedded in the white Protestant conservative mindset. And it might not be as extreme, but to say that children, that somebody's child is essentially being excommunicated from the family and becomes dead to them based off of their romantic partner, come on. And of course they promoted racially segregated housing, which now leads us to redlining. And so the point of me saying all of this is, while some of this might sound extreme to some points, it's not that far out there. And it's important to note that these things are inspiring what is going on today. And it's really tough because a lot of my family represents these ideals that aren't that far off. And now, of course, things have progressed to attacking racial others. So while it, of course, was targeting Black lives and Jewish lives, the 90s and sooner, now we have the targeting towards, Muslim lives, and of course the gay community is continuing to be attacked, and then we have immigration, we have ICE, we have all of this that is targeting people and and people are taking everything as a personal attack because of this. Because this takes everything that is meant to be inclusion and unconditional love and tries to reflect it as hate because I can't have any other person challenging my power. And I read a quote once about how people treat respect. Is respect the word I'm looking for? Where it says people who are often consider respect as them having power will see it as, if you do not treat me with that form of respect, like I am above you, like I have power over you, then I do not have to give you respect in return, which is basic human decency. And so I'm giving this information because I just want it to be clear that there is a source to what's going on. And even though it might not be headlined with white supremacy, even if it's not coming directly from the NAAWP or, from war or from creativism or any of that, just because it doesn't have that title doesn't mean that it's not coming from a source of whitewashing. And I think that's the point I want to give across. And I think that is information I can give because these are sources coming from, unfortunately, the people who share my colored skin. And I just want everyone to challenge what they might have been raised to know and to take the time to look outward and to educate themselves. Because I think another thing about Christianity is that if we think of things like the fruit of knowledge and how it was seen as a bad thing, there is nothing against education. And I think the idea of educating ourselves is frightening because it can challenge things that we've known to be true all this time. And sometimes we talk about, this statues being removed and how people say that's erasing history. But we have to consider how much of history is being erased right now because of the men that are on those statues. And so we need to see what history really is and understand that today, even though people can say, oh, I'm not my ancestors, in the Jim Crow, in New Jim Crow, and in 13th, I still have to read Jim Crow, the New Jim Crow, but in 13th, it talks specifically about how people can now have this clause in the 13th Amendment, which continues to promote slavery. So basically, men are given rights unless they are incarcerated. And based off of 13th, I'm going to try to summarize this as much as I can because it's not part of these notes. This is a different source. But based off of 13th, America makes up 5% of the population of the world. But it makes up 25% of the prison population of the world, meaning at 1 in 4 people in prison are American. And we went from these numbers to now, exceeding 2 million prisoners. And we have to consider things like redlining, like the fact that people are being specifically targeted, like the drug wars, and understand that it's still happening. So, I hope this was informative. And I know that this can be... It's sad that this is such a taboo topic. Guys, I have not been targeted for what I have said until it came to Black Lives Matter. I've been very out there about PTSD and domestic violence, and yet when I talk about this now I've gone too far, and I don't understand why that is. So, hopefully you were informed a little bit and learned about at least how white supremacy has whitewashed our history and what we know today. And I hope that people can get past their pride and their stubbornness and just take time to learn something new. So I wish you guys a lovely day. And yeah, take time to educate yourselves. Bye.